The biomonitor above the steel chair did not show a flat line. It showed an impossible spike, a jagged mountain range of crimson light climbing. So fast, the diagnostic computer began to sound a low, confused chime. Inquisitor Malachor leaned forward, his four segmented optical lenses focusing on the human strapped to the center of the subterranean vault. To the Imperial High Inquisitor, biology was a precise mathematical equation. Every sentient species in the known galaxy operated on the universal neural constant. When sensory agony reached 400 millivolts of electrical impulse along the central nervous spine, the brain surrendered. The subject would weep, lose consciousness, or vomit their deepest state secrets onto the floor just to make the screaming in their nerves stop. The device clamped to the human's temples was dialed to 700. "You are breaking your own brain, primate." Malachor hissed through his chitinous respirator, his claws resting on the glowing throttle of the neural agony emitter. No creature in the Perseus arm possesses the cellular density to endure this frequency. Tell me where the Third Reconnaissance Fleet has hidden its carrier strike groups, and I will allow your heart to stop. The man in the chair did not scream. His name was Sergeant Marcus Vance, 1st Battalion, Terran Orbital Rangers. His skin was pale, drenched in cold sweat that dripped from his jawline onto the scorched quartz collar of his torn tactical rig. His knuckles were bone-white, where his hands were bolted into heavy, 3-inch-thick carbonite wrist restraints. Marcus slowly lifted his head. His eyes were bloodshot, the whites completely webbed with broken capillaries, but the pupils were dilated into massive black, voids that seemed to swallow the flickering, sterile light of the chamber. A dark, wet sound came from the back of his throat. It wasn't a sob, it wasn't a plea for mercy, it was a laugh. "Is that all you've got?" Marcus rasped, the words thick with the taste of copper. My drill instructor in basic training yelled louder than that machine. Malachor's mandible twitched in sudden irritation. He signaled his chief medical technician, a frail, multi-limbed creature named Zyla, who was hovering nervously over the biotelemetry console. "Increase the neural feed by 30%. Malachor ordered coldly. "Override the safety governors. If his nervous system liquefies, extract what you can from the raw brain tissue before cellular death." "Inquisitor." "Wait," Zyla stammered, his spindly fingers trembling as they danced across the glass interface. "The telemetry, it makes no sense. Look at the endocrine readouts. The human is not entering neurological shock. The subject is not shutting down." "Explain," Malachor barked, stepping toward the console. "When we apply the agony field to an Imperial soldier or an Eldari scout, the pain receptors flood the cerebral cortex with inhibitory neurotransmitters," Zylar explained, his voice rising in panic. "The body tries to protect itself by inducing comatose paralysis. But this creature, this death-world organism, his brain is doing the exact opposite." On the primary display, an anatomical wireframe of Marcus's body glowed in blazing amber and crimson. His adrenal glands are dumping saturated compounds directly into his main circulatory arteries, Zylar whispered, reading the data in utter disbelief. "Epinephrine, norepinephrine, cortisol, dopamine. His metabolic rate has increased by 600% in 90 seconds. His core temperature is climbing. His blood vessels are constricting in the skin and dilating in the skeletal muscles. He is routing all available oxygen away from higher cognitive restraint and flooding his motor functions." "He is trying to survive," Malachor scoffed. "An involuntary reflex." "No, Inquisitor." Xylar shrieked, backing away from the console as if it were armed with a live warhead. You don't understand mammalian biology. In his species, extreme pain and existential terror do not trigger submission. It triggers an ancient evolutionary override. His brain thinks he is being hunted by an apex predator, and it has just turned off his muscular limiters. A heavy metallic groan echoed through the soundproofed chamber. Malachor turned his gaze back to the center of the room. Marcus Vance was no longer slumping in the chair. His spine was rigid, locked in an arch of sheer, violent tension. The veins along his neck and forearms bulged like thick hydraulic cables beneath pale skin. The sound wasn't coming from his throat. It was coming from the solid carbonite alloy restraints bolted to the steel frame of the interrogation chair creak. Skrrr! The metal was warping. Human muscles are naturally restrained by the nervous system. The brain prevents a person from using more than 30 or 40% of their actual physical strength under normal conditions because using everything would tear tendons from bone, fracture cartilage, and snap teeth. But when a human is pushed to the absolute edge of mortal destruction, when the nervous system screams that death is 1 second away, the ancient, primitive lizard brain rips the safety switches out of the wall, hysterical strength. The mother lifting 2-ton vehicle off her crushed child. The soldier carrying 3 wounded comrades through artillery fire with shrapnel in his lungs. Marcus let out a roar, not of pain, but of pure, unadulterated territorial fury that vibrated the reinforced observation glass on the upper tier. A snap, the left carbonite clamp shattered with the sound of a pistol shot. Shards of dense composite polymer exploded outward, embedding themselves in the floor. Marcus's left arm swung free, the skin around his wrist raw and bleeding where he had sheared through his own flesh to break the lock, but he didn't even blink. "Guards!" Malachor screamed, his composure completely dissolving into high-pitched terror. "Subdue him! Fire on his lower limbs! Disarm him now!" 2 heavy Imperial shock troopers, armored in pressurized ceramic battlesuits and wielding shock pikes that could drop a 4-ton pack beast, lunged across the polished floor. Marcus didn't wait for them to reach him. He leaned his entire body weight forward, gripping the remaining right restraint with his freed, bleeding hand, and twisted his torso with the explosive force of a coiled steel spring. Crack, the right armrest sheared off at the welded base, taking a chunk of the steel chair with it. Marcus stood up, 7 feet of shredded restraint still locked around his right wrist like a crude iron flail. The first shock trooper thrust his electrified shock pike forward, aiming for Marcus's solar plexus. The tip buzzed with 10,000 volts of blue ionic arc. Marcus didn't dodge. With reflexes operating on a brain overclocked by pure adrenaline, he stepped inside the weapon's reach, caught the electrified shaft of the pike with his bare left hand, and ignored the blistering electrical burn that scorched his palm. He yanked the weapon forward with such terrifying kinetic momentum that the 200-pound armored trooper was pulled off his feet. Marcus brought his right arm around. The jagged block of carbonite and steel bolted to his wrist slammed directly into the trooper's helmet. The reinforced ceramic faceplate didn't just crack, it imploded. The trooper was hurled backward across the room, his body crashing lifelessly against the heavy vault bulkhead before slumping to the floor in a heap of broken plating and leaking coolant. The second guard froze for a fraction of a second, his biological instincts screaming at him that the creature standing before him was no longer a prisoner. It was an apex death welder, running on evolutionary overdrive. The guard raised his plasma carbine. But Marcus closed the 4-meter distance before the weapon's capacitor could cycle its first charge. Marcus drove his shoulder into the guard's chest, driving him against the wall. He gripped the trooper's helmet with both hands, twisted sharply to the right until a sickening dry snap echoed through the chamber, and let the limp body drop. In the span of 6 seconds, the interrogation room had become an abattoir. Silence fell over the room, broken only by the rhythmic, heavy hiss of Marcus's ragged breathing and the terrified whimpering of technician Zylar beneath the computer desk. Marcus stood in the center of the room, his chest heaving like a bellows. Steam rose from his sweat-soaked shoulders into the chilled air of the facility. The biometric monitor above the ruined chair was still screaming its red alert, tracking a pulse that should have blown out a normal heart. But Marcus's body was holding the line, running on ancient Terran survival code, written across 2 million years of savanna wars, ice ages, and relentless combat. He turned his black, dilated eyes toward Malachor. The Grand Inquisitor was pressed flat against the emergency blast door at the rear of the chamber, his claws frantically typing a bypass sequence into the wall-mounted security terminal. "Door override. Code 994, Malachor whispered frantically, his voice cracking with panic. "Vault breach. Send tactical security teams to sub-level 6. The prisoner is loose. I repeat, A heavy, calloused hand wrapped around Malachor's chitinous throat, lifting the 7-foot Inquisitor several inches off the floor plates. Marcus Vance looked into the alien's trembling optical lenses. His face was covered in a mix of his own blood and fractured ceramic dust, his expression cold, steady, and utterly devoid of fear. "You wanted to know where the Third Fleet is?" Marcus whispered, his voice quiet, steady, and terrifyingly clear. Malachor clawed desperately at the human's iron grip, but the fingers around his trachea were immovable, locked with the unyielding strength of adrenaline-soaked bone and muscle. "They aren't hiding," Marcus said. Marcus slammed the Inquisitor's head into the access console, shattering the glass screen and knocking the alien unconscious. Marcus reached up to the wall panel, hit the master facility lock, and slammed his palm onto the crimson emergency seal. Heavy, 4-ton blast doors slid shut with a deafening thud across the entire corridor outside, severing the interrogation wing from the rest of the Imperial fortress. He walked over to the primary terminal, wiped the shattered glass from the keyboard with his torn sleeve, and interfaced his personal neural patch, the one they had failed to extract from behind his ear, directly into the Imperial Deep Space Communications Array. The screen lit up with a green human text prompt. "Terran military uplink detected." Ready for beacon transmission. Marcus pressed the enter key, routing the exact quantum coordinates of the Imperial orbital fortress, straight to the waiting vanguard of the Terran Third Fleet. He leaned in close to the audio receiver, listening to the klaxons wailing across the fortress exterior as the first human slipspace war gates began to open in the upper atmosphere. "This is Sergeant Vance." He spoke into the open fleet channel, his voice echoing through the steel halls. "Facility defenses are localized and locked down. Drop the heavy ordnance on my beacon. Earth is in the building.